Michelle, whose maiden name was Goods, was always an exemplary student and never stopped pursuing her goals. Energetic and determined, she became the leader of the cheerleading squad back in high school. After enrolling at West Virginia University, Michelle headed the cheerleading team and later transitioned to the role of coach. Bright and attractive, she garnered the attention of many men. Michelle first got married while still a university student. Her chosen one was Robert Angus, and the young couple soon became parents of 2 children. Michelle's dream was to become a pediatric nurse, so after completing her studies, she got a job at the hospital in her hometown of Morgantown, West Virginia. Many considered her a frivolous gossip due to her constant smiles and flirting with men. However, Michelle always meticulously cared for her appearance, working hard for years to maintain her perfect figure and engaging in sports. Together with their children, the family lived in a spacious, beautiful house, enjoying life. In 1999, Michelle met Jimmy Michael at the hospital. At that time, she was already married, but the relationship with her husband was far from happy and filled with love. In this regard, the new colleagues had something to discuss, as Jimmy was also in a marriage, with Dr. Stephanie from the same hospital. His relationship was also experiencing difficulties and was held together only for the sake of the children. The man worked as a pediatrician and always treated his little patients with special care. Initially, Michelle and Jimmy frequently crossed paths in the hospital corridors. They began to communicate in a friendly manner and quickly realized that they had many common interests, could support each other, and share their experiences. The man was impressed by how well they understood each other. Michelle started flirting with Dr. Michael, and he happily reciprocated her advances. Now the attractive young woman interested him not only as a friend. Gradually, they decided to take their friendly relationship to a new level and began secretly dating. The lovers quickly realized that they couldn't live without each other. Jimmy's wife suspected him of infidelity, so the couple decided to legalize their relationship. At the end of 1999, Michelle and Jimmy agreed to file for divorce, and by May 2000, to get married. Everything happened in a flash, just 3 months after Jimmy officially divorced. For the man, it was true happiness, to find a woman who understood him so well. Michelle's ability to communicate with children was especially important to him, it seemed she was made for it. At the time of their marriage, each of them had 2 children from previous marriages. Jimmy's sons and daughters visited him on weekends, and their children were roughly the same age. It seemed that everything was falling into place perfectly. During their first year of marriage, 28-year-old Michael and Michelle bought a new house less than a kilometer from the hospital. It was possible to get to work even on foot in 10 minutes. A little further was West Virginia University, which was very convenient, as Jimmy planned to return there to teach. Michelle also worked a lot. After receiving her master's degree, she strived to continue improving her qualifications, even when she became a senior nurse. In addition, the woman returned to cheerleading as a coach. Both her daughters were involved in the same activity, while the couple's sons played football. In his free time, Jimmy coached the football team. It seemed that the interests of the couple and their children were perfectly aligned. But Jimmy's real dream was to work for himself, so in 2004, he left his job at the hospital. The man began supplying medical equipment to city clinics. A little later, he opened a small production facility and started preparing oxygen cylinders for delivery to the elderly. Financially, the couple earned decently. Outwardly, the family seemed perfect, as if from the pages of a glossy magazine, but Jimmy's loved ones noticed that not everything was so cloudless. It turned out that Michelle was never satisfied. She belonged to those women who strive to control everything and achieve perfection, so the nitpicking began. In his youth, Jimmy had problems with excess weight, which he solved through sports, but the tendency to be overweight remained. After starting a relationship with his new wife, he tried to exercise, but due to his busy schedule, it was not always possible to combine training with work. As soon as he gained a few extra kilograms, sporty Michelle would immediately start treating him with contempt and often set an example of other men, which hurt Jimmy. But the main problem was different. Seeing how her husband was successfully working for himself, Michelle also wanted to start her own business. In 2005, she found a partner, Bobby Titz, a truck driver who was engaged in the supply of medical goods for Jimmy. Michelle's idea for an independent business was related to her passionate love for cheerleading. She planned to produce sports goods, t-shirts, caps, uniforms, etc. By November 2005, almost everything was ready. The process of paperwork was nearing completion. It remained to purchase the most expensive item, sewing equipment. Michelle and her partner Bobby went to Chicago to inspect the equipment and select materials. There they attended a seminar, and while staying at the hotel, they placed an order for a sewing machine, which they later picked up. Everything was going well, but the woman was not yet in a hurry to quit her job, preparing for her new activity. On the morning of November 29, 2005, Michelle Michael, as usual, was making her rounds at the Morgantown Hospital. It was a typical workday. The woman had practically completed all her morning duties when, around 11 o'clock, an urgent phone call rang out. She was informed that smoke was coming from the window of her house. One of the neighbors had seen flames. Michelle dropped everything, not explaining the situation at work, and rushed home, as it was less than a kilometer away from the hospital. On the way, she called her loved ones. The children were safe since they were at school at that time, which calmed her down a bit, but not for long. Michelle drove up to the house and saw how the flames engulfed the roof and windows. Desperately trying to contact her husband, the woman dialed his number again and again, but Jimmy didn't answer. The terrible suspicion that he could be inside the burning building made her heart freeze. The fire brigade was already at the scene when Michelle arrived and was desperately fighting the unrestrained element. The flames on the second floor were so intense that they couldn't be quickly tamed. After 30 exhausting minutes, the firefighters managed to bring the fire under control and began a thorough inspection of the area. Fortunately, the neighboring buildings were not damaged thanks to the prompt actions of the rescuers. During the examination of the second floor, charred remains were found, resembling a human body. It seemed that this tragedy was the result of an accident. However, even experienced professionals needed time to identify the remains, as they were so severely mutilated by the fire. Recognition of the deceased without additional examinations was out of the question. Although it was unlikely that it could be anyone other than Jimmy, questions arose. Why couldn't the man escape from the burning house? How did he not notice the signs of the fire, the smoke detectors going off, the smell of burning, the crackling? Was this incident really an accident? To find answers to all these questions, it was necessary to conduct a thorough investigation. The investigators started by studying the biographies of the married couple. Questioning the widow helped to reconstruct the sequence of events on that fateful morning. Michelle said that she woke up at 5:15, as usual, while her husband was still sleeping. Before leaving the house, she kissed him goodbye. At 7 o'clock, the woman got into her car and headed to the hospital where she worked. The first call to the fire department came around 10:30 from a random witness who noticed the fire and smoke billowing from the windows of the house. Shortly after, Michelle herself called, having learned about the fire. After the fire was localized, friends and acquaintances of the family had already gathered at the scene. Among those present was Jimmy's colleague, Bobby Titz. While talking to him, the investigators tried to find out the possible whereabouts of the missing man. Bobby knew the family well and noted that if Jimmy's car was still in the garage, then most likely, he was in the house during the fire. Shortly after that, the charred remains were found. Michelle was put in a police car and informed about her husband's probable death. Her reaction surprised those present, no emotions or anxiety. The only thing the woman asked was whether the law enforcement officers were sure about Jimmy's death. However, at that moment, the detectives could not yet give a 100% guarantee, as it was necessary to conduct an official identification of the body. Identification of the deceased was possible only through dental records. From the very beginning, the investigators treated this death as a possible crime, following standard procedures. During the inspection of the couple's bedroom, a burnt iron was found at the foot of the bed. However, it was unclear whether this household appliance became the source of ignition. The iron was standing on the floor, plugged into an outlet, with the heating element facing down. This fact immediately aroused suspicion among law enforcement officers. The interviewed witnesses claimed that Michelle's behavior was consistent with the reaction of a worried widow. By the time she was informed of her husband's death, the woman was frantically trying to call him. In conversations with loved ones, she kept repeating that Jimmy had to be okay. Despite the serious damage to the bedroom by the fire, the firefighters were struck by the almost complete absence of traces of smoke and burning in other rooms of the house. It seemed that the source of the fire was concentrated exactly where Jimmy's body was found. Judging by the state of the bedroom, the fire originated directly in the area of the marital bed. Although it was not easy to establish the exact source of ignition, everything indicated that the fire was not accidental. The iron, lying at the foot of the bed with the heating surface facing down, could have been an obvious cause. However, experts knew that the temperature of the soul of this appliance was not enough for wooden flooring to ignite or even smolder. At the same time, the bed itself had completely burned out, leaving only a metal frame. Even the floor had burned through almost completely, suggesting the use of some kind of combustible substance. Through the charred wooden beams, fragments of the upper room could be seen. If the firefighters had not managed to localize the fire, the floor would have inevitably collapsed within minutes. After the initial inspection of the scene, the source of ignition remained a mystery. Another question that bothered the detectives was the position of the body on the bed. It was obvious that Jimmy did not even try to get up and leave the house to save himself. Provided that the person was alright, and Jimmy was a healthy adult male, he should have noticed the fire even before he was poisoned by carbon monoxide. Even deep sleep would not prevent waking up if one's own room was on fire. Usually, the heat and flashes of light wake a person up. If the iron, which accidentally fell or caught fire, really caused the fire after Michelle left, the fire should have spread from the legs, and the pain would have woken the man up. But this did not happen. Already at this stage, the investigators suspected that Jimmy might have been dead even before the fire started, and the ignition itself was only a way to hide traces of the murder. However, without the results of the autopsy, it was impossible to answer these questions. Another strange detail was Michelle's ambiguous behavior. The woman showed excessive calmness and restraint, as if not at all surprised by the tragedy and indifferent to Jimmy's death. Of course, this could be explained by professional training, because to become a nurse, she learned to maintain composure in extreme situations. Around 5 p.m. that same day, thanks to a comparison of the found remains with dental records, it was possible to confirm that it was 33-year-old Jimmy who died in the fire. However, a full autopsy took a little more time. The results came the next day and confirmed the detectives' guesses. In fact, the cause of Jimmy's death was not the fire at all. No traces of smoke inhalation were found in his lungs, indicating a lack of breathing during the fire. Standard analyses were not enough to establish the cause of death, so it was decided to conduct an in-depth toxicological study of the tissues. In parallel, the investigators interviewed the immediate circle of the deceased, focusing on everyone who had access to the house. Of course, Michelle became the main suspect, because for her, organizing arson was the easiest. However, acquaintances described the couple as a perfect pair, albeit not without minor arguments, as in every family. The couple did not even quarrel in public, but the attention of the investigators was drawn to the victim's colleague, Bobby Tits, who communicated well with Jimmy as his manager, and for Michelle, he even became a business partner with whom she made business trips. Recently, they had become very close, and all this looked suspicious. After talking with Bobby, the man quickly confessed that during the trip to Chicago, their joint work grew into something more. The woman began to flirt, then they drank a few glasses of wine, celebrating the success of their joint activities, and it all ended in intimacy. Fortunately for the detectives, there were many video cameras in the hotel where the so-called partners stayed, and Bobby's words were checked. It became obvious that here they behaved not at all like business people, but like a couple in love. They were repeatedly recorded when they openly kissed, and continued to do so even after returning home. Just 3 days before the tragedy, they had sex in Michelle's marital bed, where Jimmy's body was later found. Michelle's behavior indicated that the marriage with Jimmy had come to an end. It seemed as if the second husband bored her, so she decided to replace him with a partner. At the same time, Bobby had a reliable alibi at the time of the crime. He was in the warehouse, where he was recorded by surveillance cameras, so he was not considered a suspect. They also checked Jimmy's ex-wife Stephanie, whom he divorced because of Michelle. She could have harbored a grudge against him because of love and committed arson. Although many years had passed since the divorce, Stephanie remarried, had a child, and did not mention her ex-husband. Moreover, she no longer had access to the house, and that morning she was with her children, who provided her with an alibi, so Stephanie was quickly excluded from the list of suspects. Only Michelle remained. If the husband somehow uncovered her infidelity, he could demand a divorce, which was unprofitable for her, because that way she would lose at least half of the property, and her business was just starting. Obviously, the wife would lose a lot, but if the husband died, the situation would be different. The widow could count on all his property, business, and also compensation from the life insurance policy. A life insurance policy for about $500,000 was found, the sole beneficiary of which was Michelle. Now the police had not just suspicions, they were justified and backed up by a financial motive. On December 7, 2005, Michelle was summoned for questioning again, but she was not told that she was the main suspect. Everything was presented as if they wanted to consult with her about the results of the toxicological examination, although in reality, the results were not ready yet. The detectives prepared a list of questions that they addressed to the widow as a medical professional. For almost an hour, they talked about this topic in order to lull her vigilance, and then suddenly changed their tone. The police asked if she had left the hospital on the morning after she arrived at work. Michelle confirmed that she briefly went out to the store and then immediately returned. Her words were immediately refuted by showing her the recordings where it can be seen how she drives away in a car in the direction of the house. She was absent for about 17 minutes. The woman immediately changed her story, stating that it was raining, so she didn't want to walk to the store and decided to drive. Michelle began to get confused in her words. It was obvious that she was lying, and suspicions about her began to be confirmed. Then the main suspect was asked about the affair with Bobby. She denied any relationship on the side, then she was shown the video recordings from the hotel where she kisses her business partner. The widow could not answer anything to that. Michelle was caught lying twice. She continued to deny involvement in the tragedy, and she also denied that she went home 2 hours before the fire started. Then the police showed the testimony of a neighbor who, under oath, stated that she saw Michelle's car near her house at about 8:20. For the third time, she changed her story and said that she forgot documents related to the business. It was necessary to pick them up that day in order to then send them by mail. Michelle prudently said that she did not go inside the house, so she did not know what was going on there. According to her, when the woman found herself in the driveway, she suddenly remembered that the document should be in the car. She checked the glove compartment and found it. After that, without going inside, the nurse hastily drove to work. When asked why she remained silent about this at first, Michelle stated that she did not want to reveal the truth due to feelings of guilt. In addition to the shame of infidelity, it seemed that if she had gone into the house and checked on her husband, everything could have turned out differently. Jimmy would be alive. Michelle's interrogation lasted almost an entire work shift before she was finally given the opportunity to leave. Based on the information collected during the conversation with the suspect, the detectives were convinced of the woman's involvement in the death of her husband. However, to prove her guilt, more evidence needed to be gathered, since it was not possible to break the nurse's alibi. After the interrogation, the investigators returned to the couple's house again and carefully examined the room where the tragedy occurred for 48 hours. At the same time, the expert group was completing work on the reconstruction of the event. The specialists recreated an identical copy of the Michaels' bedroom, taking into account all the details, from the finishing materials to the factors that could affect ignition. The arson experiment was conducted several times. The main version of the investigation was that the source of ignition could have been an iron left on, which caused a slow smoldering for at least 2 hours. The toxicological examination was nearing completion. Due to the poor condition of the remains, the results were only obtained on February 26, 2006. The analyses showed the presence of a lethal dose of one of the medical drugs in the body of the deceased. This substance has a paralyzing effect and is extremely dangerous. It is used to prepare patients for surgical interventions. When used, the person is necessarily connected to an artificial ventilation apparatus. Otherwise, death is inevitable due to complete paralysis of the respiratory system. With the introduction of large doses, as in the case of Jimmy, the lungs completely fail within 7 to 8 minutes after the injection. Considering that the man worked as a pediatrician, he did not have access to such drugs even during the period of work. Unlike him, for Michelle, as a nurse, it was much easier to get the medication. Based on the results of the toxicological report, a decision was made to arrest Michelle. She was accused of murder and arson. The trial began on July 9, 2007, at that time, the accused had turned 35 years old. Despite the threat of life imprisonment without the right to early release, the woman remained calm and restrained. The investigation revealed numerous facts of deception on the part of Michelle, but no direct evidence of her guilt was found. In addition, her financial situation allowed her to hire qualified lawyers, so the process promised to be difficult. Prosecutors insisted that the motive for the crime was the husband's $500,000 insurance policy. Michelle's infidelity also indicated her desire to break off the relationship as soon as possible and get the maximum benefit. The defendant had relatively easy access to paralytic agents used during operations. According to the prosecution, she poisoned her husband even before she went to work. And after some time, she returned to arrange a fire and hide the traces of the crime. Michelle probably could have tried to burn everything right after the murder. But, realizing that the house was not catching fire, she returned and tried to speed up the process. For this, an iron and an unidentified combustible substance were used. The defense immediately drew attention to the time intervals. It remained unclear how the fire broke out and became noticeable only 2 hours after the arson. The lawyer argued that this was simply impossible. However, the prosecution had thoroughly prepared and had their own version of events. It was believed that the iron, left on the floor, could not cause ignition by itself, and Michelle understood this. Therefore, she returned to the house during the 17-minute break when she was absent from the hospital and made a more successful attempt at arson. Experts who conducted as many as 6 reconstructions of the fire supported the prosecution's version. The combustible substance was set on fire during her return home, but the effect was not as fast as with the second attempt. Tests showed that with the doors closed, there was not enough oxygen for full-fledged combustion. This was also confirmed by the configuration of the ventilation ducts. The set-on-fire mattress simply smoldered slowly. Because of this, there was neither smoke nor flames in large quantities. It took 2 hours for it to burn through completely. This was confirmed by several experiments. When the charcoal came into contact with the floor materials, full-fledged ignition began, which the witnesses noticed. The process accelerated when holes appeared in the floor, which increased the air supply. Now the explanation of what happened looked quite plausible and convinced the jurors of the defendant's guilt. On July 18 of the same year, they went to deliberate. Michelle was found guilty, but the jurors recommended mitigating the sentence. The woman received life imprisonment but with the right to parole. This became a kind of compromise, since the case was entirely based on indirect evidence, albeit very convincing, and the widow did not admit her guilt. She spoke in her own defense at the trial. Michelle looked stunned at that moment but tried to keep herself together. Her family protested against this decision. They fully supported Michelle and did not believe in her guilt. The court ruled that Michelle Michael would be eligible for release after 15 years in prison on a murder charge. For arson, she received 20 years. The poisoner will have the right to first appear before the parole board in 2027 when she turns 55. The woman filed appeals, but they were all rejected. Michelle's children live with their biological father, he forbids them to see their mother. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.